Yes. Wherever you want. Welcome to tonight's KCRW partner screening, and we'd like to thank our partners at Sony Pictures Classics for bringing us this interesting and unfortunately timely movie. So let me welcome the guests. We have the director right here, Matthew Brown. Jodi Balfour. And Matthew Goode. It's just a light little movie to start the holiday season. So this is based on a play that was performed off Broadway, correct?
Yeah, it was based on a play that was based on a book that was called A Question of God, and it came out of a college course that was running for about 30 years up in Boston at Harvard that they had, was based on Sigmund Freud and atheism, and then they decided to bring in another point of view, so they introduced C.S. Lewis to that, and then from there it became a play.
And how did you think, okay, I'm going to make this into a movie? Why this of all plays?
I mean, I kind of, I should say my father's a psychiatrist, and so,
Were you ever his patient?
I hope not. I might have. I was probably running away from this project more than anything in the beginning, but to me, what drew me to it was, I think it was about 6 years ago when I first came across this, and I feel like we're all in these tribes, and everybody's so polarized, and it was that was 6 years ago, and today it's times 100, and I was drawn to something that allowed a conversation to happen, and that people could vehemently disagree with one another and still have some respect. So that's probably what drew me to it. Yeah, more than that's it.
More than the psychiatry part of it.
More than the psychiatry. Yeah.
You were working out your
was some
personal
pretty deep
issues
stuff
with your
going
father.
on. Yeah, with Freud. I don't know. He had his daughter in therapy, and he had
and he had you in
Dorothy
therapy.
you in therapy. So
And they then sort of repeated that. Interestingly, Anna Freud was Dorothy Burlingham's children's analyst as well, which is and sort of a parent figure. So it was a very interesting approach.
Oh, wow. So how did you, now we'll move on to Jodi for a little bit. So tell us how you decided to attack this character.
Oof. A little bit of going straight to whatever resources there were on her and about her.
Did you know much about her
Not
before?
a thing, not a thing. Very little even about Anna, if I'm honest. And so there's a book written by Dorothy Burlingham's grandson on her that was, with all respect to him, very difficult to read. And so I turned to Anna Freud's biography instead, written by Elizabeth Bruhl Young, and just sort of like immerse myself as much in that, paying most attention to the parts that intersected with Dorothy, and then just lots of chats with Matt, and you can do all the research in the world, but at the end of the day, we're not making a documentary, we're making a work of imagination and interpretation. So comes a point where you like leave that and go to imagination and creativity, and so it was a combination of those things.
Yeah, and she's a very strong character, right?
Yeah.
But, obviously tormented, and so in real life she was married and had children and
Separated from her husband.
who was very wealthy.
Yes, and she herself came from the Tiffany family. Her grandfather founded Tiffany and Company. Her father was
The lamps.
the jewel.
And the jewels.
Her father was the glass artist and decorator. But yes, married to a very wealthy man, but they were separated, and then she left for Vienna and lived with the Freuds and sort of immersed herself in psychoanalysis.
And was she Jewish?
No, I don't think so. No, I don't think so. Yeah.
Okay. Now it's your turn.
I don't know.
How much about C.S. Lewis did you know about before you signed on to this?
Well, before I start, can I just say something else? I had every intention of looking a bit smarter than I do this evening, but owing to a fountain pen explosion and the fact that I just forgot to get this suit pressed. I tried it on and I looked like I'd slept outside of CVS pharmacy last night, so I thought, I better not do that. And then just as I was leaving, I said to my wife, I thought, I look all right, right? And she was like, yeah, if you're going for I look like a shit Steve McQueen from The Great Escape. And I was like, it's very easy to stay grounded in my house. But anyway, so yeah, C.S. Lewis. I mean, if you'd asked me, obviously prior to making the film, I knew a little bit, and obviously I read the Narnia Chronicles when I was a kid,
Yeah.
and the thing that scared the shit out of me, if I'm honest, was the fact I was a huge fan of The Elephant in the Room. Was the fact that the person standing opposite me every day for the first 4 weeks had played C.S. Lewis rather marvelously in Shadowlands, which is a film I just adored. I mean, if you don't know Shadowlands, Tony. He's fairly, actually, I mean, I didn't say this to Tony, but actually having done a deep dive on Lewis, it's not quite, I mean, Joy Gresham, there's two schools of thought. Joy, who he married after Janie, he didn't marry to Janie, but he married her later on in life. And some people think that she was just a downright, she was very much after his money. But it was much more of a romantic story the way that Shadowlands was. Anyway, I still like the film very much. And it has two of the best crying scenes you'll ever see. One obviously is at the end where he's like, me too. And his shoulders are going. But really the miraculous one that he does is when he's in the church. And he says something like, sorry, it's 4:30 in the morning my time, so you're going to have to go with how my brain works. But yeah, there's a moment where he goes, I'd have to love her, wouldn't I? I'd have to be suffering the torments of hell. And there's nothing on his face but just tears dripping. The man's just fucking amazing, he really is. But yes, no, so I had to sort of...
Was he giving you tips on how to...
No, he was very respectful. Or
he wouldn't say...
Or he thought I was a lost soul. So
I wouldn't have done it that way.
But it's great, I mean, the timeline was a lot smaller. So... He hadn't written as much, so there wasn't as much for me, like a lazy actor. Wasn't as much for me to read because he hadn't written. But I mean, I guess one of the most important things for me was, yes, well, I mean, it's the same with any character you ever build, right? But when you're dealing with a real person, you get to deal with fact, whereas a lot of the time you have to fill in the gaps a lot for yourself. So that was very useful. But he wrote a book in, God, it's a long time since, I think 1955, called Surprised by Joy. And he talks, it's like a memoir about his early life. And there's just so much trauma. You know, obviously, you've seen the film, so I don't have to go through too much of it. But that's endlessly fascinating to sit and think about. And people are always like, oh, what's your process? How do you go through it? And if we're honest, which I'm gonna be, I fucking hate talking about process, but I know that you guys love it, so let's have a happy compromise. And I don't have an office at home. My wife does. I somehow missed out on that. So my office is the bathtub. And so I was having about I was in the bath for like 6 hours a day on this one. And which led to Soap obviously keeping me grounded by saying, well, this is probably the cleanest part you've ever done. So I would sit there and to fill in gaps and everything else, a bit like people who, I don't go into state, but you kind of, I imagine myself, shall I just shut the fuck up?
Well, we just got to the good part, the bathtub. So you ought to finish that part.
No, what's it like when you go into a state? You kind of, people do this, they meditate. So I meditate upon all the information that I glean from history and what's been written down and everything else.
So you read...
I'm still the dickhead who's going to make it
Very
flesh.
modest.
And that helps me, and I'm going to
He
shut.
did a deep dive.
He did.
He did. Yeah, we would talk about stuff, and he'd be telling me things that I had no idea about, and I thought I had done somewhat of a deep dive, and he'd really done a deep dive, and he when we talked about Lewis, I mean, it was funny because he mentions Tony playing Lewis, and I talked to Tony about his playing Lewis, and he's like, well, I kind of did my own thing with Lewis, and I didn't know if he was wanting me to share that with Matthew, and I might have at some point, but it was just to say, don't feel like you're limited. You can create your own version of this, and that's something we did. But I think it's that old saying, you kind of need to know the rules to break the rules, and I think Matthew really did that deep dive.
Well, Tony mentioned that. He did mention that to me. He goes, well, if you're playing Prince Charles, then you do it would be kind of beneficial to look a bit like him and also sound a bit like him, because he's very much in our sphere. We are very well aware of who that person is. Whereas, some people might know what Lewis looked like. And we actually looked a little bit like each other in our 20s. But we're unfortunate. But there's very little recording of him. There was actually one of the things that he became famous in England for, because it was way before the Narnia series. So in the beginning of the war, he spoke on Christianity on the radio, and the fact that those tapes were quite valuable, they reused them, and so they wiped 6 or 7 of the sort of the lectures that he gave. But there's one remaining, and it happens to be on YouTube, of course. One of the finest instruments to do your research. But if I watch by rocket a card, and you kind of like, I can't do that. I'm not doing that, because that just would be fucking unbelievable.
That's how he spoke. Was insane. The way he spoke. It was so sort of like, it's just.
Well, I don't think that came from the Belfast thing. I think, but I think it's to do with physicality and obviously due slightly to the time that it was at, but it was still, really quite straight. It was really weird. But we would have fucked the film if I'd done that. As tempted as I was.
I think Matthew could probably pull any out.
And you didn't want to have Tony. May I call him Tony too?
Yeah. He wouldn't have it any other way.
He wouldn't.
No, he wouldn't.
Not Sir Anthony.
He'd stand up straight.
And you didn't want him to have a Viennese accent.
No. He actually, the accent that he did use, the grovelly voice, he worked on that for about a month and a half. So he put a lot of work into that, but he felt strongly about not trying to do that. And I understand. There's a lot of different schools of thought on when you try to do continental accents or not to. So we went with.
Mm-hmm. And there's a particular thing also about the Viennese and the German accent that it can, just in contrast. It's like why does, and sometimes you go, I'm not sure about that, but then if you watch Amadeus, and that has a fairly, that's American accents, but I just don't care. And I think on that movie people tried to do the Viennese and the German, and it just became almost it just got away from the truth. That's what I heard anyway. And so that was part of it, I think.
Yeah, it's tricky. He actually said bloody one time, twice. He says, I'm the bloody hypocrites line. I don't know if you remember that. After he said bloody for something else. And I was like, well, the first bloody I think I can make sense of, and the second bloody now we're verging on British. But then I was like, well, he is living in England for a year, maybe he's saying bloody. So but that was one moment.
What would be the equivalent in German? We don't know.
I don't know.
Well, okay, speaking
of... It was a choice. He has the ability.
Yeah.
For God's sake, it's Tony. So.
Right, so you don't say, just do your thing.
Well, I think he did his own version of what he felt was right for that, and I did.
The dialogue, was it taken at all from actual things that they said? Or did you, and the playwright?
Well, Mark definitely did take some dialogue from writings, I believe, from Question of God, from stuff that was taken from writings as well. So I think there was some dialogue that was taken. Certainly ideas were taken from both men, but then there's a lot that was made up. This is a fiction. We don't know whether or not this actually happened or not. I know when they brought in the C.S. Lewis character to the seminar originally, I believe that he was, there was some possibility that in the research that the professor did at the time, that there was a visit from a young Oxford Don towards the end of his life. And a lot of signs did point to the fact that it could be Lewis. So there was some relations between the two, family relation. So, I don't know, this is a fiction. It was, one of the things that Tony felt was really important for this film was to lean into the dream aspects of it, and the fantasy, and just we had something to say that was more than just the debate on God. It was also a look into the psychologies of both men. I think Lewis was very much formed by his PTSD and replacing his mother in some ways, and I think Tony was dealing with Freud was dealing with the loss of his daughter and his grandson, and his really complicated relationship with Anna. I think Sophie Freud was really the love of Freud's life, apple of his eye, and when she was gone, I don't think Anna could ever quite live up to that, although eventually I think she did.
And and then went on to
Did great things, yeah, absolutely.
do amazing things in
Yeah,
child psychology.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So we are all cowards in the face of death. From era to era, one discovers the whole truth. These are your lines?
No, they're not my lines.
Or
they're Mark's lines,
Mm,
I think, yeah, from the play.
yeah. So you talked about their sort of personal traumas that they were dealing with, the PTSD and the death of Sophie and other personal tragedies that Freud had. But this is all set against the backdrop of the war, and they both have these deep personal experiences with war. And they both come to opposite conclusions when it comes to God and war. Given what's happening now in the world, how does that shape the way that you see this movie and what you want people to get out of it?
I mean, I always thought it was really important for me with this film to not let my voice get into the way, my own personal feelings about it. In terms of, I wanted an argument from both sides, to hear both sides and let the audience decide what. I was hoping that at the end of the movie, when you leave here, the person you came with, maybe you'll talk about somebody, you say, well, I liked the movie or I didn't like the movie, but then you start talking about it a little bit, and that there actually could be conversation about these different things. So I didn't want my voice as the filmmaker to say, I'm pushing you this way or I'm pushing you that way. I have my personal opinions, but I'll probably keep them to myself. But I think I recognize how timely it is. I think it's the question of our time, really, is science and religion, and where does that fall? And I mean, there's a quote by Einstein that I'll probably slaughter, but I will slaughter it. It was basically that science without religion is lame, and religion without science is blind. And what I take from that is that they don't have to be polar opposites, that have to be, you just don't have to just negate one side or negate another, and that there can be spirituality and there can be science, and they don't have to be incompatible. So I guess that's where I would, if I had anything to say, I would say that at least there should be a conversation.
Ostensibly also, considering what you're talking about with the greater ramifications of what's going on in the world right now, is we need very fucking intelligent people sitting in a room together and trying to find the Venn diagram of where we agree rather than anything else, which is why Trump would be a fucking disaster. because he doesn't even know where Ouagadougou is. That's Burkina Faso, by the way. But yeah, we need intelligent people doing that job. That's as simple as that, and it's a fucking national embarrassment for you. It really is. And it destabilizes your economy, and it makes you a world mockery. And but it does. No, if you don't have respectable people who didn't dodge fighting the war, and who said that McCain was a I mean how that didn't become a bigger fucking thing in your papers, in your news, that like a war hero, he he said was a joke because he got captured.
Yeah.
This guy you cannot talk about him and mock him and make him a joke without realizing just how fucking dangerous he is to your democracy.
So you see,
You cannot. You have to take it very, very seriously.
Very strong
because
opinion.
within 10 years you'll have nihilism in this country if you haven't had a fucking revolution.
So you can have a strong opinion like that, and then a person who may disagree with that strong opinion should be able to feel okay and not threatened enough to be able to speak up.
Is there anyone here who has an opposite opinion?
We're also in Los Angeles. So, we're in Los Angeles, and that's
A meerkat to that, I will. But that's the point, isn't it? Because we all have. I'm not the most intelligent person in the world, that's for sure. I think I proved that this evening. But we have to have debate. We have to have proper debate. And here's the point. I mean, do we remember? I don't know why it's gotten political, but I'm on a high horse right now, so I'm going to go. Do we remember? No, we are. We are. But do you remember when Trump did this on national television during a fucking live debate? And he came around behind Hillary. Do we remember this? I probably won't watch it. That's fine. There was a good game of football on at the same time. But he did this. And if she turned around and said, "Get the fuck away from me, stand over there, or I'm going to grab you by the pussy," she would have won the election. Matthew. She would have won the election. Just. Am I keeping you up, friendo?
Matthew, good political strategist.
Okay, now I want to know, Jodi, what was the set like?
This, pretty much. Oh my goodness. The set was the best. I sadly, tragically, some could say, barely worked with this one.
Yeah.
So.
She was very happy about it.
But the day we were in the same green room, there was lots of animation.
Right, I can imagine.
Yeah.
And Matt, how did you control your set? Because I'm having problems controlling my set.
I'm so sorry, I ruined this. Actually, I was very well behaved on set. But I'm a live wire act off it.
You were great. No, it was an interesting shoot because we had the first half. We were an independent film. We were a pretty short shoot, and the first 2 weeks were mostly Matthew and Tony when we were doing most of all that dialogue, which was about 7 pages a day, which was tremendous when you consider Tony's age and the fact that he wasn't wearing earbuds and he memorized all those lines, and it was incredible, absolutely incredible. And I have to give a big congratulations to Matthew on that too, because I think it wouldn't have happened unless he was the most patient, kind, and generous actor that he really is, and Matthew is that. So you really made that possible. So we created a really safe place to work, where we could make mistakes and fall down and get back up and try different things. And I think that's where you see some of the great performance come out of between Matthew and Tony, and then we had the second part of the shoot, which was a lot of the stuff that was outside, and all the stuff with Anna and Dorothy.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're kind of a little bit different at times. And Matthew was throughout the film, so you were the entire length of it. So he was pretty well behaved. Yeah, he kept it light. And in Ireland, the politics are a lot different. So we shot the movie in Ireland, so it was safer ground.
I don't know where it came from. I just felt it.
Yeah, it burst out. I get it.
Do you, has this movie opened in Britain yet?
No, it's not. No, we just finished the movie, I think on about the 13th of November. So we were racing.
Well, not shooting it, as in
No,
you mean your
mixing it and all the finishing touches. So this is really just finally finished, where it was delivered. It hasn't even been delivered yet. Yes. Very excited.
And was there
sharing it with an audience is incredible. Yeah. So thank you so much. I wanted to say that tonight. Thank you for coming here and being here and being our audience tonight. It means the world to us, and it's incredible. So thank you.
Okay, well, good note to end on before.
Hang on, because I got something. No, we've done a few of these, and they're always really beneficial. But actually, I wouldn't mind if audience members have got something to ask, because we're here.
Oh, okay.
And I know that
Does
the
anyone
last
have
couple
a
of times
question?
people were like, why the fuck were we allowed to ask a question? I was like, oh, I wasn't in charge. So if anyone's like, here we go. It's Jerry Springer.
Matthew, I just want to say you're preaching to the choir if you're in California. So if you can do this in the Midwest, do a big tour throughout the red states and come on with your inimitable charm, you might do us all a great service.
Kevin McCarthy is from California.
And I mean that seriously, because there's a huge evangelical base who will love this film. And this is the big debate right now about why are the white evangelicals going so heavily for Trump. And they're going to embrace this film for different reasons. So I hope you're working with those parties who actually book this film to those markets, because they're there.
Will this film be shown?
We definitely have. It was something.
And I
that-
had a question, I'm just commenting. But, you know, you can answer that if you want. But I'm just saying, if you have that kind of energy about it, that has to be done, because this film will be used. It will be used for other purposes.
I hope that's not true. I don't think it should be. I don't think it's one side over the other. I hope not.
No, but that's the whole point, is the distortion. But having said that, my question is, where did it, I'd always heard that C.S. Lewis was sort of this virginal bachelor until he met Joy. And was this speculation or a truth about his affair, sleeping with Mrs. Moore?
No, I mean, it was, I mean, there's pretty good evidence of it. I mean, and certainly not virginal. I mean, once you've done a deep dive, as I did, he was actually quite into flagellation, which is whipping, when he was at boarding school, which I thought was fascinating, although I didn't find the time to be able to get it into the film. But no, he was, yeah, it was very much, I think that was also one of the things that was kind of really interesting. If you know you're going to go to see the father of psychoanalysis and just modern psychology, effectively, and you know that, I know your work, I'm making you Freud for the purposes of this argument, and I know all of your philosophy, and I know that anything that I reveal of myself, he's just going to go, I know that you're going to say something about the fact that I went with Janie Moore. So that, because it does make sense. And I know because of my father, and that's what he's going to say about religion. So that's just another layer of why it's very interesting to go back. If you went back and rewatched that now, one would hope that you would see the subtlety of the stuff that is going on between Tony and I, because there's this element of like, I know,
He knows. Yeah, it's interesting in doing research and with the writing with the film, this question about authenticity in a sense, like where you're asking, what did that actually happen? And I think it's very safe to say that definitely happened with Mrs. Moore. They had a time of where she. Yes, they did. And then Christianity got in the way of that, and there was a big question of whether or not that was an excuse for him to be able to exit the relationship with this middle-aged woman that was growing older at that point. It's interesting because the C.S. Lewis fans of the world in the evangelical community, you have to do a deep dive to really get to the truth of that, and I think it's interesting because a lot of that's kind of covered up because that's not something that they want to advertise. At the same time, when you look at Freud and his relationship with his daughter, when you start to get into and we've talked about this a ton with Anna and Dorothy, they also didn't want really them to tell the truth about Anna and Dorothy's relationship. And that's coming, the higher reaches of the psychoanalytical community didn't want to acknowledge the fact that they had that relationship on a lot of levels. So I think that's also interesting. I think the history's got a way of things things get presented in a certain way, and this film maybe opened the door into two of these people's lives a little differently.
At the end of the movie, though, there's a suggestion that he accepts their relationship. Did that not happen in real life?
I don't think that, do you mean Freud accepted the relationship? Yeah, I think he accepted it.
I mean, I think
Although he did kill himself 2 weeks later.
Yeah, it wasn't for long.
I mean, he was very fond.
I think he gave him the blessing, the benediction.
There you go.
Yeah.
We worked closely
On his
with
way
the
out.
museum too.
Yeah, although fascinatingly, I was looking at the Freud Museum archives today a little bit, and they still refer to Dorothy as Anna Freud's friend, which is so like cleanly and suppressive. But anyway, yeah. But they also had a beautiful relationship actually. Dorothy was a member of the Freud family at large too, really, like very embraced by Freud in other ways. But I think that embracing didn't extend to the idea of her being romantic with Anna for sure.
Did he see her as maybe another daughter, or how did he see her?
Don't know, we'd have to ask him, but there's certainly fondness between them and correspondence between them, and he was her analyst for a time,
Right.
which is also fucking bananas.
Totally twisted.
So bizarre.
Yeah.
And that he never thought anything was strange with him being the analyst of her.
I think it was the nascent stage of a lot of that work. So you can't look at something that happened then through the lens of today. But I mean, or can you a little bit, because it's.
Well, you kind of
I
have
think
to.
we all humanly
Yeah.
know that something's probably a little wrong when you don't approve of a relationship and you're not encouraging that relationship, and you have both people in therapy with you. It's, I don't know.
There's a lot you can't talk about.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question.
I think you've been replaced.
Yeah. Just go ahead, shout it out.
I just wanted to do an actor I just wanted to thank you for presenting a civil rights discussion, in this time, first of all. Also for presenting America's people who are drinking, because, nobody's perfect, but in the storyline, disabling the ability for one side to point to the other and say, you're wrong, but they're both relatively good in this competition. But just out of curiosity, because C.S. Lewis, was the Christian in this story, why was it? Is it because of the book? And it may be a naive question because I didn't read the book or see the plan. Why was Freud the only one who quoted Bible verses and C.S. Lewis never did?
Good question. I don't know. Actually, the answer to give you a good answer for that.
I think I have an answer for it, and I've been, which will not come as a surprise. No, I was thinking about that because
Talked about it.
there must have been a temptation when you come up with the idea of this to turn this into a fucking barnstormer where there's massive arguments between these two, and let's make it really, really, really opposed and practically a fist fight. But it would have been it has nothing to do with those two men. Like in real life, he was, okay, so one of the most important things that I found out about him, I found this tiny fragment of a video from Douglas Gresham in his 60s in a house in Ireland, talking about how when he used to burst into who was the son that he adopted from the marriage after she died of cancer. And he was like, I was 8 years old, 10 years old, and I'd run around the house even when he was working, and I kind of did it sometimes to try to get a reaction from him. And I burst into his room when he was busy writing and he had a deadline, and he never turned around and did anything other than be charming and smile and give me. He was never upset about anything, and I think that says a lot of one of the things I loved about when I found that out. I was like, oh, it's so great, because that's what I feel like he was in the room. He sees a man who's dying. That's very patently obvious, and he's clearly very unwell and he's old. And the minute that he turns up, he gets attacked. Not the first time that's ever happened to a Christian. And it's important. He has very Christian sensibilities. Everything that's said about this man, he believed in giving. If you earn whatever you earn, if you earn £1,000, he believed in giving 300 quid of that to the poor. And some people would say, why did you give that money to that man on the street? He's only going to go and drink it. And Lewis was like, well, if he didn't, then I would.
Yeah, and just to answer your question a little bit more too.
Oh, all right.
Sorry, I didn't cut you off. But there were a few things. He didn't quote Bible verses at him, but he did quote his own. There's a lot of lines that C.S. Lewis wrote that he did quote at him, such as on the stairwell. when he's talking there, those were some of Lewis's famous lines about pain being the, I can't remember exactly what the line was, but about.
I don't know how beneficial, for a man who doesn't believe in God, why quote scripture?
Right.
So,
And then he did a line with, he does this line in the scene with Orla, where you do, and he says, it doesn't really matter what I think, when she asks him about the Bible. And a friend who is a pastor saw that, and he said, that's C.S. Lewis in one, that's him. That's just him. And so I don't know if he was somebody that would have been throwing around Bible verses that way, but we certainly used his words.
That's what I mean. It's like he gets kind of attacked in this,
Yeah.
but his humility and his humanity, I just think he's there just to really hear a point. He's not combative towards it.
Anyway,
Let's go on for a
thank you all.
Okay, well, we do have to end, unfortunately. Thank you for coming out, and thanks for Sony Pictures, and go tell your friends to go see the movie. Comes out December 22nd. Thank you.
All run out.